Good morning. We're broadcasting live from the Mike's Guitar Lounge, otherwise known as my basement. I wanted to start this morning by introducing you to three of our seven beautiful grandchildren. You see the picture on the left there. That's a picture of Jacob, who goes to college at this, I can't remember the name of the college, but it's down near Opelika off Highway 280. The beautiful young lady on the right is Hallie. Hallie is a student at Kennesaw State University over in the Atlanta area. And I want to ask your forgiveness for the words on the uniform, but the one in the football player in the middle is Jackson. He's an all-star athlete over in South Forsyth County. Jackson, you see him on the right. He's got the picture there with the big fish. Jackson is a three-sport athlete, and he is a great college student, has a great future ahead of him. And this summer, following his graduation, he has decided to go to Paris. Maybe I didn't make that clear. He's not going to Paris, France. He is going to Parris Island, South Carolina. Jackson has decided to join the Marine Corps. I asked him why he didn't want to take a scholarship and go to a college. He said, "Grandpa, I want to be a Marine." I think he's in for some surprises when he gets to Parris Island and finds out it's not the beautiful vacation spot in the South, but I'm really proud of Jackson. And so in July, he will be headed over to Parris Island. You see the screen there is a picture of a DI in the face of a recruit saying, "Welcome to Parris Island." Parris Island's full of stories from Marines who have gone through there and have learned so much from our Marine Corps to be able to use in the service of our country. When you see the insignia, it says they call it the MCRD, the Marine Corps Recruiting Depot in Parris Island, South Carolina. The motto, the creed for the DIs there says, "These recruits are entrusted to my care. I will train them to the best of my ability. I will develop them into smartly disciplined, physically fit, basically trained Marines, thoroughly indoctrinated in the love of Corps and country. I will demand of them and demonstrate by my own example the high standards of personal conduct, morality, and professional skill." To be a Marine is a high calling, and that's the expectation that is given to all Marines that come through there. The drill instructors there are committed to turning out men who will be able to defend our country. There's a well-known quote that is attributed to an anonymous Marine recruit talking about Parris Island. He said, "When I first got there, I thought I would die. After 2 weeks, I hoped I would die. Later, I knew that I would not die because I had become too tough to kill." There's rigorous training at Parris Island, and only those who have been through it understand what Marine recruits go through. The mission of Parris Island says, "We make Marines by recruiting quality young men and women and transforming them through rigorous foundations of basic training, our shared legacy and commitment to our core values, preparing them to win our nation's battles in service to our country." This morning we're going to talk about a man by the name of Robert Leckie. Robert Leckie was a writer. He was a news reporter, but he also served in the South Pacific during World War II. Leckie came to Parris Island out of New York, and his book, Helmet for My Pillow, chronicles the story of his recruitment and his time at Parris Island, and then his time in the field of training. After he came out of the war, he became a reporter, authoring many books on American war history. And in 1957, he wrote the book Helmet for My Pillow, and he told his wife the reason he wrote this book He saw the Broadway musical South Pacific, and it disgusted him. He said, I have to tell the story of how it really was. I have to tell people, I have to let people know that the war wasn't a musical. So Robert Leckie wanted to tell the real story, the true story, and he told the true story in graphic detail. He said it is a process of surrender. At every turn, at every hour, it seemed a habit or preference had to be given up, an adjustment had to be made. Even in the mess hall, we learned that nothing mattered as so little as a man's likes or dislikes. They didn't care what your likes were. They were there to train you and transform you. We would complain of living out of packs and sea bags, blissfully unaware of the day when either would become a luxury. See, the thing is, with Parris Island, you think it's as bad as it gets, and then you go to war and you find out that it very well can get worse. One of the quotes that really stands out from his book, he said the most important thing in this transformation, he's still talking about that transformation, was not the hardening of my flesh or the sharpening of my eyes. You get that, you get the physical. But the part you can't replicate is the mental. He said it wasn't the hardening of my flesh or the sharpening of my eyes, but the new attitude of mind. I was a Marine. Talk to a lot of Marines, they'll tell you that. They will say that there are no former Marines. I am a Marine, is what they would tell you. So we look at the stories from the Old Testament. We're going to start with David and Bathsheba and David and Goliath. Scripture covers the life of David more than any character in the Old Testament. He is attributed to have written 73 of the Psalms. And there are 59 references in the New Testament to David. He was called a man after God's own heart. He also, Jesus, called himself the Son of David. David was a shepherd, a musician, a warrior, a king, a psalmist, a liar, an adulterer, and a murderer. But even in the New Testament it says David was a man after God's own heart. And we have to look at what God took him through to make him a man after God's own heart, to understand what this man went through in preparation to serve God. When David was first anointed king, he was young. And he would have to go a number of years in a training fashion and a service to God. Even after being anointed king, he could not ascend to that throne, and it was nearly 15 years before he actually would take that throne. But at the time, we were seeing Saul disintegrate spiritually. It said the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. A demonic spirit began to torment Saul, and Saul was disobedient to God. And the people around him were looking for a way for Saul to be soothed in his anguish and his torment. And they said, let the Lord now seek out servants who are before you to find someone who is skillful in music. David was skillful with the lyre. So David would come in and play the lyre, and it would soothe Saul. So Saul told them to go find such a man, and they did in the form of David. So we're introduced to David the musician. The musician, the psalmist, the poet. One of the men working for Saul, or under Saul, said, "Behold, I've seen the son of Jesse. He is skillful in playing. He is a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him." It's really important that his reputation went before him. So Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send David to me." And so David came to serve Saul, the man he would be called to replace. When he was first called, Saul loved him greatly. David became his armor bearer. And he said, "Let David remain here, for he has found favor in my sight." And whenever the harmful spirit came, David took the lyre, and Saul was refreshed, and the harmful spirit departed from him. David was in the service of the man he would eventually replace. So Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. David became friends with Saul's son Jonathan, and they made a covenant with each other because they loved each other so much. And Jonathan, who was heir to the throne, who could have stepped into Saul's place, recognizing what God was doing in David's life, he stripped himself of his own opportunity to take the throne and turned it over to David. He gave him his armor and his sword, his bow, and his belt. And wherever David went, David was successful. And this was good in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. But we can't forget that Saul had this spirit upon him that caused him to do things that were not pleasing in God's sight, that also caused him torment. And he allowed his flesh to take control. And Saul developed a very strong jealousy for David. And after David had finished striking down Goliath, the women came out of the cities of Israel singing and dancing with tambourines, songs of joy, musical instruments, and they sang out loud, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s." This struck a note. It struck a chord with Saul that Saul did not want to hear. Instead of being happy for David's success, Saul took it to offense and allowed his flesh to take control. So Saul was angry, and everything they said displeased him. He says, they've ascribed 10,000 people to David, and they've ascribed thousands to me. And what more can he have now but my kingdom? So Saul took it upon himself to go after David from that day forward. And the next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed on Saul, and he raved within his house, even while David was playing the lyre. Saul had his spear in his hands and hurled the spear, for he thought, "I'll pin David to the wall." David managed to evade him. This began a time where Saul was looking for opportunities to defeat defeat David, because he saw him as his enemy. So David continued to lead his men to victory, and Saul continued his jealousy. And after he tried to pin him to the wall, David escaped and fled. Saul sent out messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. David was married to Michal. Michal was Saul's daughter, and she tried to protect him. She said, "If you don't escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed." So Michal helped David escape through a window, and he fled. So he is going down this road that's going to continue for a long period of time with David as he seeks to evade Saul. He goes to Nob and meets with a priest by the name of Ahimelech. When he got there, he lied to the priest. He didn't have any weapons with him. He asked for the sword that he had used to kill Goliath. He told Ahimelech that he was on a secret mission for Saul, and asked Ahimelech to assist. And then after leaving Nob, Saul came to Nob and found out that Ahimelech had helped David, and he ordered the execution of all the priests there. From there, David went to Achish, king of Gath. And when he got there, Achish was not an ally, he was an enemy. And he was suspicious of David. So when David sensed that, he pretended to be insane. He started allowing slobber to come down his beard and acted crazy so that Achish would not feel intimidated or threatened by him. So David's on the run. He's already gone to Nob, and now he's gone to Gath, and he's going to continue to run. From there, he escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all of his father's house heard it, and other men that were around him, who were also in distress, heard where he was, they came to David's aid, and they wanted to serve David. They wanted to walk with David. They wanted for David to lead them. So they gave him the opportunity to take command, but that also made him an enemy of Saul, a bigger enemy towards Saul. And at that point in time, he was up to about 400 men that were following him. So David was a teenager when he was anointed by Samuel. But he had to wait 15 years before he was able to take the position. Not only did he wait, this is important when we talk about waiting on God. We're waiting on God to act in our life. We're waiting on him to give us guidance in what we're doing. We're waiting on God to answer a prayer. Waiting is not a time of inactivity. The waiting time is a time where we serve God, obey God, and allow God to do the work. There is nothing biblical that says for us to sit on the sidelines and trust God by simply waiting on him in an idle fashion. We're called to continue to serve him while we're looking for his answers to be revealed in his time. So in David's case, he went through a period of considerable adversity that would equip him for his eventual role. His life, his leadership, his successes, his failures, the Psalms, his legacy, they were all being shaped in the fire. We often don't appreciate the fact that it is the fires of adversity that are the things that help train us. And you look back at what happened at Parris Island. What you have at Parris Island is people that are making it tough on you so that you'll be tough on the battlefield. They'll put you into conditions that will train you and better equip you down the line. So sometimes when God calls us to do something, he's not just calling us to wait, he's calling us to be trained. So we listen to him, we respond to him, we continue to work where he's calling us to work. And when adversity comes, we find ourselves in a position of having to trust him. When things are going well, we don't get trained. When things are going well, we celebrate, we party, we dance. But when the storms come, the storms of life come, it's a perfect opportunity for us to learn not only how to trust God, but also how to obey God. And obedience and trust are two parts of the same coin. In Psalm 22, David expresses his desperation. When's the last time you were desperate for God? Really desperate. He said, my God, why have you forsaken me? And we also recognize those words were from Jesus on the cross. Why are you so far from saving me for the words of my groaning? I cry out day by day, but you do not answer, and by night and I find no rest. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. You see the picture? David's desperate. He can find no relief. He's crying out for God to speak, and yet he's not hearing what God is saying to him. One of the things about David's Psalms is you will find a lot of anguish, a lot of struggle in them. But in almost every Psalm, you also see his celebration of God's faithfulness. So he does not end in anguish in any of his Psalms. He may start off with anguish and lamentation or fear, but he finishes by saying, I will trust God. Psalm 22 is a powerful picture of David's heart. He wasn't looking at his difficulties so much as says, God, where are you? why are you so far away from me? I cry to you day and night. Please show yourself to me. That's the picture. We have a description. This is from Spurgeon. We have both a description of the darkness and glory of the cross, the sufferings of Christ and the glory which will follow. Oh, for grace to draw near and see this great sight. We should read reverently, putting off our shoes from our feet as Moses did at the burning bush. For if the ground be holy ground, anywhere in Scripture, it is in this psalm. It's the picture of the presence of God. And the only thing that can draw us into that desire, that desperation, is the things that God allows us to go through that call us to cry out to Him. And then we go to the book of Job. And we see that the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? A blameless, upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Satan is in the presence of God, and God says, have you considered my servant Job? Job was a righteous man. Job was wealthy in human terms. He was well respected in his community. He had no apparent character weaknesses and no issues that needed discipline. Job was sitting from a material perspective in the catbird seat, and he had a good relationship with God. C.S. Lewis said, hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. And that's important to think about, because the easy life is never going to lead to the profitable life in terms of spiritual growth. So God allowed Satan to take away. No, God incited Satan to take all of his possessions. It's a pretty important distinction. Satan didn't come to God and say, let me take out Job. God went to Satan and said, have you considered him? And Satan said, I can't attack him. You got a hedge built around him. You're not letting me touch him. So he said, okay, take away all of your possessions, destroy his reputation, kill his children, attack his health, and endure 3 well-meaning friends who continue to pound him with unpleasant advice. That's what Job went through. And the hand of God was in it from the start. So Job, people like to talk about the patience of Job. And I think if you read the full book of Job, that's really not a good characterization. I don't know that I could ever endure that type of trial and adversity that Job did any better than he could. I know I couldn't do it as well as he did. But he's still searching for answers. You're searching for understanding. When things go wrong, we always want to ask that question, why? Sometimes we ask it of God. Sometimes we just scream it at the dog or the tree. But we want to know the answer. And so Job is talking to Eliphaz, one of his friends who are giving him bad advice. He says, teach me and I'll be silent. Make me understand how I've gone astray. What does reproof from you reproof? In other words, Eliphaz, what do you really know? In Job 9, he says, how can a man be right before God? If one wished to contend with him, one could not answer him once and 1,000 times. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength. Who has hardened himself against him, God, and succeeded? Job says, I've got no answers. I've got no way to respond to God. I've got no way to convince God to do me differently. I've got no way to demand anything from God. I'm doing the best I can, but I can't get right before God. Whatever he's doing in my life, I don't understand. So in Job 17, you see the desperation. You see this in a lot of David's Psalms. My spirit is broken. My days are extinct. The graveyard is ready for me. Surely there are mockers about me, and my eye dwells on their provocation. My spirit is broken. If you recall, David said, a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Sometimes that broken spirit is exactly what God needs in order to do what he wants to do in our lives. And sometimes that's the way he does that, to move us in the direction he wants us to go. And so then we move to the very well-known passage in Job 19:25. We all love the song, I know that my Redeemer lives. But look at the verses leading up to that passage. Sometimes we like to look at verses without looking at the context. Before he says, I know that my Redeemer lives, which is a joyous recognition of God's grace and God's promises, he starts off by saying, the hand of God has touched me. Why do you pursue me? Why are you not satisfied with my flesh? I'm hurt. I'm hurting deeply. And my flesh is being torn apart. And you don't seem to be satisfied. You just keep wanting more. And he cries out for someone to hear him. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Well, guess what, Job? They are. And if we could only just learn from you. Oh, that with an iron pen and lead they were engraved in a rock forever. Job says, I want people to know what's going on with me. And I want them to be inscribed in a book. And we have that book. If you'll just read the book of Job from beginning to end, from every word that Job says, that God says, that all of his friends say, you get a good picture of the sovereignty of God in a time of great difficulty. But he concludes that passage by saying, I know that my Redeemer lives. I know God is good for his promises. What he doesn't realize is he's talking about a Redeemer, Christ. And at the last, he will stand on the earth. And yet in my flesh, I will see God. So Job has gone from broken desperation to deeper trust and intimacy with God. One of the things that we get out of adversity, and I think one of the most important things we get out of adversity, is learning to be close to God. Because when everything's going right, we're dancing in the streets, we're having a good time, but when things are going deep, the cry of desperation says, God, take care of me. Just hold me. It's like the cry of a daddy and a daughter. Well, the daughter says, Daddy, just hold me. There's an intimacy there that can't be replicated in times of when things are going well. So we get to Job 42, and Job answers God after God has revealed himself to him. He said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know, which I did not know. Hear and I will speak. I will question you, and you will make it known to me. I had heard of you. Job had a relationship with God before this started. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear. I've been to Sunday school. I've gone to church. I've taken theology classes. I've taken seminary classes. I've memorized verses all over the place. I've taught Sunday school. I've worked in the nursery. I've parked cars in the parking lot. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ears. But now through what you've allowed me to go through, my eye sees you. And all that other stuff doesn't matter. I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes. This is the most important thing that we can get out of adversity, is to draw closer to God and allow him to reveal himself to us. So many of us are looking forward to the relief that we forget the power and the beneficial nature of our relationship. So it doesn't matter how it comes out. The fact that I'm close to God is the only thing that matters. Paul said, for me to live is Christ, to die is gain. It doesn't matter what happens to me as long as I've got Christ. My eye sees you. John Bloom in Desiring God wrote, "It's the lack of sense of desperation for God that is so deadly. That's so deadly. If we don't feel desperate for God, we don't tend to cry out for Him. Love for this present world. We see everything out in the world. That's what we want. It sets in subtly, but it's like a spiritual leprosy, damaging spiritual nerve endings so that we don't feel the erosion and decay happening until it's too late. We've gotten in love with this world. We want what the world has to offer, and God is a sideline for many of us. So he says we must fast and pray and support the suffering church in the diseases that can set in from harsh adversity. We must also fast and pray for God to deliver us from the diseases that set in from prosperity. The worst thing that can happen to a believer. And you don't want to hear me say this. The worst thing that can happen to a believer is to enjoy excessive prosperity, because we lose our desperation for God. We lose our sense of need for God. We cannot manufacture our own desperation. Only God can make us desperate for Him. And oftentimes He does that through the fires of adversity. In Luke, he says to prepare to be a disciple of Christ is to prepare for spiritual warfare. He said the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected and to be killed. And if anyone would come after me, you need to come after me the way I've called you. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life is going to lose it. For whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man who gains the whole world and forfeits his own soul? We saw that in the quote from Jim Elliot, the well-known one that says, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." What we can give up is everything. What we want, the pearl of great price, is that relationship of intimacy with God. And Jim Elliot sought those kind of things. Paul sought those kind of things. In times of prosperity, rarely do we seek that same thing. And Paul said, "I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For His sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ, that I may know Him and the power of His resurrection, may share in His sufferings, and be like Him in death. I count everything as loss. It's all rubbish. The only thing that matters is my relationship with Christ." You have a picture of Goofy there heading to the beach, and that's the way a lot of people look at the Christian life. They say, okay, it's going to be a life of peace and prosperity and cocktails and partying. And yeah, we do some of that. We do have fun. There's nothing wrong with having fun. But Tozer says the flaming desire to be rid of every unholy thing and put on the likeness of Christ at any cost is not often found among us. Think about that in your own life. We want to have fun, and we want to be around all the great saints and martyrs throughout history, but we want to do it in a pleasant, air-conditioned, party-type environment. It's the trial that we go through, the battle-hardened heroes who have fought the fight and won the victory, and who have the scars to prove that they were there when the battle was joined. He's finished by saying, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until He has hurt him deeply." I really, really love that quote, and I hate that quote, because I really want it the other way around. So look back on your experiences as a Christian. Ask these questions of yourself. Have I grown comfortable and complacent in my relationships with God? A lot of us have. Or do I have a spiritual thirst that wants to know him more? Okay, God, I've learned this, but I want more, I want more, I want more. That's a hard character trait to have. Can you name a trial where God has taught you something? I'm sure all of us can do that. It's pretty easy to see that God has taught us something in a trial. It's not always to see it while we're in the trial. Have you been through a trial where your faith in God was tested and ended up making you stronger? Have you been through a trial where your attitude has been changed? Have you experienced times when you felt like you were waiting on God? If any of you have not experienced this, then you probably are not a true believer, because we all experience as believers. You feel like you're waiting on God, and God's timing is not the timing that you want it to be. I want what I want, when I want it, and I want it now. God, my plan is better than yours. Please do it my way, and let's get this out of the way. Don't make me wait another minute. But during that time of wrestling, have you ever noticed that some of that time, probably all of it, but have you recognized that some of that time has been profitable? Have you wrestled with God? It's okay to wrestle with God. It's okay to cry out to God and scream at him. Job screamed out for answers, and God answered him. God didn't answer the why question, but he said, here I am, let's talk. C.S. Lewis said, God whispers to us in our pleasure, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts to us in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And Spurgeon said, I am certain that I never did grow in grace, one half so much anywhere as I have upon the bed of pain. And Oswald Chambers said, if we are ever going to be made into wine, we will have to be crushed. You can't drink grapes. Grapes become wine after they have been stomped, crushed. Think about that. Surrender to God is an act of the will. It's an act of obedience. Trust is best learned under battlefield conditions. Surrender without trust is simply fatalistic complacency. Okay, Lord, I give up. I just won't try. You're not answering my prayers. You're not doing what I expect you to do. That's complacency. And trust without surrender to God's will is a powerless trust, because now we're trusting God to do what we want him to do rather than what his plan is for us. So it takes both surrender and trust together to be able to, for us to learn during times of adversity and trial. Job went from prosperity to broken desperation, from deeper trust to surrender and repentance to intimacy. David became a man after God's own heart after running for 15 years from Saul and doing some things he shouldn't have done that got him under God's disciplining hand. Joseph was imprisoned in Egypt for at least 13 years. Moses was wandering around 40 years in Midian before God brought him back to Egypt. Peter was so anxious to serve Christ, but God could not use him until he had humbled him, until he had cowered in the face of a little girl by a campfire. Peter needed to be trained. All of us need to be trained. So the time of training is a time of preparations. We see battles fought in movies and video games with no real comprehension of the real physical, mental, and emotional toll that was felt by our Marines on the field of battle. Go back to what Lecky said, a helmet for my pillow. At Parris Island, it was uncomfortable. On the field of battle, it became a luxury. A poncho was a nuisance. But in the field of battle, it became a barrier against mosquitoes and malaria. There are a whole lot of different perspectives that can be brought by the discomfort and the pain that we go through. In Marines, the training is there designed to tear down their simplistic lifestyle and their view of life and turn them into warriors. God is using the same type of methods in us oftentimes in the trials of adversity to create the discomfort that makes us dependent on him and makes us serve him better. To be warriors for Christ, we must stand firm when he's putting us through the trials and fires that he has ordained for our purpose. Job and David both loved God before they went to the fire, but through the fire their faith became stronger. When the fighting gets intense and the enemy is nearby, that is when we feel the urgent need to cry out for Christ. As we conclude this lesson this morning, I know none of us want to endure adversity. None of us want to have pain in our lives. We all want everything to go well, and we want God to bless us and not call us to be tried for his sake. But God has a purpose, and his purpose is to prepare us for whatever he's called us to do. God has prepared you for this day, for his glory, for his purpose, and he will prepare you for every mission that he puts in your way. He has been preparing you every day of your life since the time that you became a believer and a follower in Christ. As we go out this week, let's keep in mind the difficulty. Right now we're living in a very difficult time with this virus. We have jobs that are on the line. We have careers that are messed up. We have health and death and so many different things coming at us from so many different areas. It's a call to trust God. It's a call to trust him by obeying him and allowing him to train us, not just for this battle, but for the next one. This is not the last trial we'll go through. This is not the last trial you will go through. This is God's opportunity to take you to Parris Island, to look you in the eye and say, you're mine. Till then, have a great week. Hopefully the next lesson will be in person. We'll wait to see that. Love y'all.